You're watching Phantom Astronauts, Night Terrors, where history and horror meet in the shadows of our darkest stories. Tonight, we revisit the tale of the Donner Party, an ill-fated journey west that became one of the most chilling chapters in American history. Surrounded by isolation, starvation, and whispers of the supernatural, the story of the Donner Party is one of both survival and madness. If this haunting retelling grips you, remember to like, share, and subscribe to help the channel grow. Check the links in the description for more ways to support us. Now join me as we step into the snowy wilderness and explore the legend of the Donner Party. The first snows came early that year, heavy and unrelenting, blanketing the Sierra Nevada in a suffocating silence. It wasn't the kind of snow that brought a lighthearted chill or children's laughter. It was the kind of snow that felt alive, pressing down on the earth, trapping everything beneath its weight. The 31 members of the Donner Party, huddled in their makeshift cabins at Truckee Lake, had long since ceased to count the days. They were beyond calendars now, living instead by the gnawing in their stomachs and the howling of the wind. Virginia Reed, barely 13, sat by the dim light of a dying fire, her breath fogging in the icy air. Her mother lay motionless on the pallet beside her, the hollows of her cheeks sharp as knives. Virginia tried not to look at her mother's face too long. It made her think of death, of bones beneath skin, and she couldn't afford to lose hope. But hope was a fragile thing here, as brittle as the frozen branches outside. The cabins smelled of smoke and decay. Wood was running low, and what little they managed to burn filled the air with a choking, acrid haze. In the corner, Patrick Dolan mumbled to himself, his words low and feverish, his eyes darting toward the others, as if they were shadows waiting to pounce. "They're coming for us," he whispered. "The spirits. The mountain won't let us go." Virginia shivered and pulled her thin blanket tighter around her shoulders. She wanted to tell him to stop, but there was something in his voice that made her hesitate. He wasn't just talking nonsense. He believed it. The first death had come weeks ago, before the snow had even reached its deepest drifts. Jacob Donner had been the first to succumb, his body wasted by hunger and sickness. They had buried him under the snow, but the ground was too frozen to dig deep. Virginia had overheard whispers that night, voices thick with fear, and something darker. "Don't look at the snow too long," Mrs. Murphy had warned, her voice a hoarse whisper. "It's not just the cold that'll kill you. The mountain watches." Virginia didn't know what she meant, but she had felt it too, that creeping sensation of being watched. It wasn't just the other survivors, their hollow eyes following every movement. It was something else, something bigger than the mountain, older than the trees. At night, when the wind howled through the gaps in the logs, it sounded almost like laughter. By the time December came, they had eaten every ounce of food. Oxen bones had been boiled until they dissolved into a thick, tasteless jelly. The hides from their wagons were shredded into strips and gnawed like leather jerky. But no amount of boiling or chewing could fill the emptiness that clawed at their insides. The hunger was alive, relentless, a beast that gnawed at their ribs from the inside out. It was Patrick who suggested it first, his voice low and trembling, but insistent. "We'll die if we don't," he said, his eyes flicking toward the corner where Franklin Graves lay still, his body already stiff and pale. "He won't mind. He's gone," Virginia had turned away, pressing her hands over her ears. She didn't want to hear it. She didn't want to believe that they had fallen so far. But when the smell of cooking meat filled the cabin later that night, her stomach betrayed her. It growled, sharp and insistent, and the taste of bile rose in her throat. She wasn't the only one. They ate in silence, their eyes avoiding one another, the sound of chewing loud in the suffocating quiet. Virginia didn't eat that night, but she heard her mother's voice, weak but resolute. "It's survival," Mrs. Reed whispered. "We do what we must." But it wasn't just the hunger that changed them. After that night, the air inside the cabin felt heavier, as if the walls were closing in. Patrick Dolan's mutterings grew louder, his eyes wild and frantic. "They're angry," he said. "The spirits. We've broken the mountain's rules." No one knew what he meant, but they felt it too. The nights grew darker, the wind louder, and strange noises began to echo through the forest. It wasn't the sound of animals. There were no animals here, not anymore. It was a low, mournful wail, like a voice carried on the wind. Virginia lay awake at night, clutching her blanket, trying to convince herself it was just the storm, but deep down, she knew better. One night, she saw them. She had woken to the sound of movement outside the cabin, soft footsteps crunching through the snow. At first, she thought it was one of the others, but then she saw the figure through the cracks in the logs. A pale, slender shape, almost human, but not quite. Its limbs were too long, its face too sharp, and its eyes gleamed in the moonlight like silver coins. It stood there for what felt like an eternity, its head tilted as if listening. Then, slowly, it turned toward the cabin, its gaze locking onto hers. Virginia felt her blood turn to ice. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The creature's lips parted in a smile, revealing teeth like shards of bone. The next morning, Patrick Dolan was dead, his body found just outside the cabin. The others said he had gone mad, that he had wandered into the storm and frozen to death. But Virginia knew better. She saw the marks on the snow, the long, clawed tracks that led away from his body and disappeared into the trees. The rescue came in February, long after Virginia had stopped believing it ever would. When the rescuers arrived, they found only half the original group alive, their faces gaunt and their eyes hollow. They didn't ask questions about the bones scattered in the snow, or the tracks that didn't belong to any human. They didn't need to. Virginia never spoke of what she saw that winter. She grew up, married, and had children of her own. But the memories lingered, sharp as the cold. Every winter when the snow began to fall, she would wake in the middle of the night, her heart pounding, and listen for the sound of footsteps outside her window. She never told anyone, but she could still see it sometimes, in her dreams, the pale figure standing in the snow, its silver eyes watching, waiting. Thank you for joining me on this chilling journey into the legend of the Donner Party. If tonight's episode of Phantom Astronaut's Night Terrors left you uneasy, remember to like, share, and subscribe to help the channel grow. Don't forget to check the links in the description for more ways to support us. This has been Phantom Astronaut's Nocturnal Tales. I'll see you out there.